I just got the call that shattered my morning. My parents had sold our family house to fund Madison's failing business, and now, as if it weren't enough, they expected me to let them move in temporarily, conveniently forgetting that my life isn't theirs to commandeer. I stared at my tiny studio lease in my hand, signed just yesterday, ready for me to escape the chaos. How could I tell them I wasn't the safety net they assumed I'd be without feeling like the bad daughter? Every step I take now feels like a countdown because living under their expectations is a trap I can't afford. The shrill ring of my phone cut through the quiet morning like a knife. I glanced at the screen and froze. My parents. My heart skipped a beat, a cold shiver running down my spine. They never called this early unless it was serious, or worse, inconvenient. I answered with a cautious, "Hello?" and immediately felt the weight of their voices pressing down on me. My father started talking before I could even breathe, outlining in a hurried, almost triumphant tone how they had sold the family house. Just like that. Sold. To fund Madison's struggling business. I felt the words echo in my skull. Sold. Our home. Everything I associated with stability, with memory, with family, gone. And for what? A venture that had been teetering on the edge for months, if not years. Then came the kicker. "We're moving in with you temporarily," my mother said, her tone sugary but carrying the unmistakable undertone of expectation. "Temporarily," she emphasized, though their eyes, even through the phone, seemed to suggest that temporarily might as well have meant indefinitely. My grip tightened around the phone, knuckles whitening. I could feel my chest tighten with a mix of disbelief and irritation. Their voice didn't just announce plans, they were dictating my life now. And the worst part? The unspoken assumption that I would accommodate, care for, and cater to them without question. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing thoughts. Temporarily in their vocabulary had a peculiar elasticity. I imagined the invasion of my apartment, the overbearing routines, the subtle judgment for every small choice I had made. Every ounce of my independence felt like it was under siege. And then, a small, private smirk of relief flitted across my face. They had no idea, no inkling that I had already signed a lease for a tiny studio, a place where I could finally breathe, a place they would never control. I had the key in my pocket, the contract ready, and a plan to move out the very next day. The thought of freedom mingled with guilt because I couldn't shake the nagging question, was I being selfish? I let my gaze wander across my apartment, now eerily silent. The furniture looked suddenly foreign, shadows stretching oddly in the morning light. I could almost picture them barging through the door, unpacking as if it were theirs, claiming space in a world that was supposed to be mine. My chest tightened again, and I whispered under my breath, "If they knew—" I didn't finish the thought. The weight of the unknown pressed down, and I felt the first tremor of dread sneak in. Even with my plan in place, the emotional stakes were high. This wasn't just about moving boxes. It was about asserting boundaries, challenging expectations, and navigating the volatile terrain of family obligations. I started packing, carefully folding clothes, stacking boxes, tucking away the personal items that symbolized my independence. Each item I touched was a reminder of the life I was carving out for myself, a life that was not dictated by others. As I worked, I couldn't help but pause and address you, reader, in a silent whisper. If this were your world, if every move you made was scrutinized or anticipated by those who should support you, what would you do? Would you fight for your space or succumb to the gravitational pull of obligation and guilt? I wasn't asking for advice. I was acknowledging the complexity, the moral maze that I was navigating with every careful step of packing tape and folded sleeve. The phone buzzed suddenly, cutting through my concentration. A message from Madison appeared. "Mom says we'll need you all week." My stomach sank, and a cold knot of tension formed in my chest. She didn't say it directly, but I knew the implication. They expected me to drop everything, to prioritize their needs over my own, as if my life had no boundaries. My fingers hovered over the screen. How could I explain that I had already claimed a corner of autonomy? That tomorrow I would step away from their assumptions entirely? The dread of confrontation loomed, yet the fire of self-preservation burned stronger. I paused, leaning against the wall, the packed boxes looming like silent witnesses. I thought of my childhood bedroom, now empty, sold off to fund someone else's ambitions. And yet, there was something strangely exhilarating in the act of reclaiming my space, however small. Each box carried more than clothes or books. It carried a declaration. I would not be their default caretaker. I would not be the safety net for every financial misstep or emotional demand. And for the briefest moment, I allowed myself to smile, savoring the quiet rebellion of this tiny, determined choice. Then I returned to packing, the rhythm of folding and stacking giving me a strange calm. The phone sat idle beside me, a silent threat of impending calls and expectations. I imagined the moment tomorrow when I would turn the key in the lock, step into my studio, and finally exhale fully. But for now, the tension held, taut like a wire. Each item packed, each careful decision, carried the weight of anticipation, the uncertainty of how my parents would react, the micro-cliffhanger of tomorrow's confrontation. And in that stillness, I felt the first true stirrings of freedom, edged with fear, threaded through with the raw, unfiltered complexity of love, obligation, and self-preservation. I leaned against the wall one last time, eyes tracing the lines of the empty apartment, the ghosts of expectation pressing close. I could almost hear my mother's voice in the corners, my father's shadow on the floor, Madison's text buzzing like a warning siren. And yet, there was hope, a fragile, flickering light that told me this fight for my space, my independence, my sanity was mine to claim. The boxes waited, the keys gleamed, and I whispered to no one in particular. Tomorrow, everything changes. Boxes were stacked in uneven towers around the small apartment, each one carrying more than just clothes or books. They carried my silent declaration of independence. I moved from one to another, carefully folding shirts, tucking fragile trinkets in paper, labeling each box with meticulous precision. My parents' voices still lingered in my mind, a mixture of authority and expectation that made my chest tighten. How could I leave without shattering their illusions of control, yet still claim what was rightfully mine? It felt like threading a needle blindfolded, one false move and everything could unravel. As I worked, I tried to center myself, imagining you, the reader, sitting quietly alongside me. You've been here before, haven't you? Forced into choices that feel both urgent and impossible, balancing empathy with survival. I whispered to you as I tucked a box of old letters into the corner. If it were you, would you stay? Would you bend until you break or take the step that terrifies you most? The questions didn't have easy answers, but voicing them made the weight feel just a little lighter. Sharing it, even in this silent way, grounded me. Then my hand brushed against something unusual, a folded envelope, yellowed with age and tucked behind a stack of photo albums. Curiosity pried it loose, and as I unfolded it, my stomach tightened. It was a letter from my parents to Madison, written years ago. I scanned the words, and a sinking feeling spread through me. The letter praised Madison in ways that were unmistakably indulgent, repeatedly stressing how much she deserved opportunities and support, while my name barely appeared, mentioned only in passing as a helper or backup. The favoritism was stark, the implicit message unavoidable. I sank to the floor, envelope clutched in my hands, feeling both betrayed and validated. How had I never noticed this so clearly before? The discovery made the coming confrontation feel heavier, sharper, and infinitely more delicate. I dared not imagine their reaction if they knew I'd found this. I leaned back against the wall, letting the letters slide from my fingers as I exhaled slowly. The tension pressed in from every direction: the apartment, the past, the looming presence of my parents, and the invisible expectations of Madison. I closed my eyes for a moment, drawing in the sounds and silence, feeling the rhythm of my own heartbeat. This pause was essential. I had to find equilibrium before continuing. Without it, I risked becoming the reactive person I never wanted to be, the one whose decisions were dictated by fear and obligation rather than strategy. A soft ping from my phone drew my attention. A trending article about families with extreme expectations had popped up in my notifications. I clicked it, my eyes scanning the words, absorbing stories of others trapped in the unrelenting weight of familial pressure. Some had bent until they snapped. Others had fought back, carving spaces for themselves at great personal cost. I felt a pang of recognition. Every anecdote resonated, echoing my own internal conflict. There was a strange relief in realizing I wasn't alone, that the tension I felt wasn't some personal failing, but a pattern as old as family itself. I paused, letting the words sink in, and for the first time in hours, I smiled faintly. Understanding brought a tiny measure of comfort, but the reprieve was short-lived. A notification popped up from Madison, and my heart sank. She had sent a message. "Don't forget, Mom said we'll need you all week." The tone was casual, almost innocent, but beneath it lay an expectation I couldn't ignore. And then it hit me, the full weight of the truth. Madison had never been completely honest about her project's failures. She had hidden the depth of the chaos, leaving me to absorb the fallout. My hands trembled slightly as I set down the stack of shirts I had been folding. This wasn't merely about packing boxes. It was about navigating a minefield of deception and manipulation, a game in which the rules had been written without my consent. I leaned against the window, watching the morning light spill across the cityscape below. My apartment was quiet, the street bustling far beneath, oblivious to the storm building inside me. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, inhaling the cold, crisp air, letting it fill my lungs. The pause was necessary, an emotional reset before the next wave of planning, confrontation, and negotiation. This window, this view, this moment of stillness became my anchor. Here, I could think clearly, evaluate my next steps, and gather the courage to navigate the week ahead. I picked up a pen and began jotting notes, a private conversation between me and the page, silently including you, the observer, in the process. Step 1. Move quickly, efficiently, minimize confrontation. Step 2. Anticipate questions, stay calm, assert boundaries. Step 3. Protect space without guilt. The act of writing was grounding, giving shape to the chaos. I realized that strategy wasn't just about action, it was about mindset. The way I approached the challenge now would dictate not just the move, but my ability to maintain autonomy without burning bridges entirely. As the morning unfolded, each movement became deliberate, each decision weighted with care. I folded a blouse and tucked it gently into a box, then paused to look at the sunlight playing across the floor. I thought of the letter, the hidden favoritism, and Madison's message. The mix of relief, dread, and determination twisted inside me, a coil of emotion that kept me painfully alert yet strangely alive. The micro-cliffhanger of the day loomed. Tomorrow would demand confrontation, strategy, and poise, and every decision I made today would shape that outcome. For now, though, I let myself sit back, leaning against the windowsill, eyes tracing the contours of the city, breathing, waiting, planning. Each box packed was a claim, each pause a chance to fortify my resolve, and each acknowledgement of my feelings a reassurance that I was not just surviving, but actively shaping my future. I allowed the tension and uncertainty to coexist with a tentative optimism, a fragile hope that I could navigate the next days without losing myself, even as the shadows of expectation and obligation crept closer. The first knock came softly, almost polite, but it carried the weight of inevitability. I froze mid-motion, my hands hovering over a box of neatly folded clothes, my breath catching in my throat. Then came the second knock, louder, insistent. I swallowed, my stomach knotting, and muttered, "Here we go." The door swung open before I could even reach it. There they were, my parents, standing in the doorway, their expressions carefully neutral, though their eyes held the subtle fire of expectation. They carried duffel bags and suitcases as if they were stepping into their rightful domain, their posture claiming space that wasn't theirs. "Hi, Elena," my mother said, her voice deceptively light. "We're going to stay for a while, just temporarily. Don't worry, it won't be long." Her emphasis on temporarily didn't soften the implication that she intended to take over. I inhaled slowly, steadying myself, reminding myself that panic would only give them leverage. "Mom, Dad," I began, keeping my tone calm and measured. "I understand you need somewhere to stay, but I've already signed a lease for my studio. I'll be moving there tomorrow, and I need that space for myself." My words felt brittle as I said them, fragile against the weight of their unspoken expectations. They shifted slightly, exchanging a glance, a silent conversation that made my chest tighten. My father opened his mouth, then closed it again, clearly weighing his response. I pressed on. "I want to help, truly, but I can't take on full responsibility for everything. I have my own life, and I need to maintain some independence. I hope you can understand that." I could feel the tension coiling in the air, a taut wire stretching between us. Every breath felt loud, every second dragging longer than the one before. Then my phone buzzed. Madison's name flashed across the screen, and before I could decline, she was on video. "Elena, you can't just walk away." "We'll need you for the whole week," she said, her tone casual but commanding. The screen flickered, and I could see her eyes, the way they were expecting compliance, not negotiation. I felt my stomach drop. How could I balance loyalty and boundaries when the stakes were suddenly higher? The micro-cliffhanger of the call, combined with their physical presence, made my pulse quicken. I lowered the phone, setting it aside, and exhaled slowly. My parents were still there, standing in my living room as though they belonged. But then, as I studied their faces, I noticed something I hadn't expected. Flickers of anxiety. My mother's hands twitched slightly, a habitual gesture revealing tension. My father's jaw tightened, not with anger toward me, but as if he carried a burden of his own. And suddenly, a sliver of understanding cut through my defensive armor. They weren't simply overbearing, they were afraid. Losing the house, losing stability, watching Madison struggle, they were trapped in their own expectations. I paused, letting the realization settle, and in that moment, I addressed you silently. Reader, sometimes those who pressure you the most are themselves prisoners of fear. I felt a surge of empathy, unexpected but grounding. They were complex, flawed, human, and yet my responsibility remained my own. I could feel the delicate balance shift, the tension between obligation and autonomy tightening. My father cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Elena, we know this sounds demanding, but we've felt stuck too. Madison has been pushing, and we've been caught in the middle." His admission hit me like a sudden gust of wind. They were not villains in this narrative. They were players constrained by Madison's expectations and their own fears. The twist bared a layer I hadn't seen before, complicating every assumption I had held about them. My pulse slowed slightly, replaced by a new current of consideration and cautious understanding. I leaned against the edge of my counter, observing their movements, their subtle gestures of anxiety and uncertainty. The apartment felt smaller now, the walls pressing in with the weight of unspoken emotions. I kept my voice steady, calm, while my mind raced, calculating the best way to navigate the coming hours. I wanted to assert my boundaries without shattering them, to maintain peace without sacrificing self-respect. The micro-cliffhanger of tomorrow's move lingered, threading through each pause, each glance, each measured word. For several moments, no one spoke. We existed in a fragile suspension, the unspoken dialogue heavier than any conversation. I could feel the rhythm of tension and relief ebbing and flowing like waves on a shore. Their fear met my resolve. Their expectation met my boundaries. Inwardly, I acknowledged my role as both participant and observer, silently questioning, how much could I absorb before the strain became unbearable? I glanced down at the packed boxes, each a marker of autonomy, a tiny rebellion quietly asserting itself in the face of encroaching demands. My eyes met theirs again, and for the first time I sensed recognition, not anger, not acquiescence, but awareness. They understood, perhaps reluctantly, that my independence was non-negotiable. And in that understanding, precarious as it was, the tension thinned slightly, though never entirely. I sat down on the edge of the couch, letting the room settle around me. My parents remained standing, a quiet acknowledgement of the boundaries I had silently enforced. I allowed myself a moment to breathe, feeling the pressure ease just enough to regain composure. Each pause, each silence was an emotional reset, a chance to process the micro-twists of fear, empathy, and tension that had intertwined in the room. Watching them, I felt a complex mixture of relief, concern, and anticipation. The stakes had shifted, the confrontation had revealed vulnerabilities I hadn't expected. I sat in stillness, observing, calculating, breathing. Every movement, every glance, every unspoken word mattered, and I knew that tomorrow's steps would be even more critical. For now, I was both a participant in the drama and a silent witness to its unfolding, maintaining control in the midst of chaos. The door to my studio clicked softly behind me, and for the first time in days, I felt the tension of my apartment begin to dissipate. The small space smelled faintly of fresh paint and new beginnings, a blank canvas for the life I had been longing to claim. I set down the boxes I had carried in, the weight of them symbolic, yet strangely liberating. Each one represented a choice, a line drawn between expectation and autonomy, a boundary asserted silently but firmly. For the first time in what felt like forever, I exhaled fully, letting the weight of familial pressure recede, even if only for a moment. I moved through the studio, placing books on shelves, arranging the small kitchen, straightening the few pieces of furniture that fit snugly in the compact layout. The quiet was startling, almost disorienting, but it was mine. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant sounds of the city outside, the gentle creak of the floor beneath my feet, they were the soundtrack to my reclaiming of space. I allowed myself a brief, private smile, savoring the relief that came with ownership, control, and solitude. But even as I unpacked, my mind ran over the events of the past days. The confrontation with my parents had left traces of anxiety embedded deep in my chest, like threads woven into my heartbeat. I reminded myself that independence wasn't just physical, it was emotional, mental. I needed to cultivate both in this tiny apartment that was now my sanctuary. My hands moved with intention, stacking neatly folded shirts, arranging trinkets, adjusting the placement of items with care. Each act of organization became a ritual, a way to assert control over my life in contrast to the chaos I had left behind. The soft buzz of my phone drew my attention. A message notification, a subtle ping that instantly drew a spike of curiosity and caution. I set down a box, fingers hovering over the screen. It was from Madison. My stomach sank slightly as I read the words. "Hey, Elena. I was hoping I could come by your studio later. I need your input on a few things." My pulse quickened. She wasn't calling to check in casually. She was testing the boundaries I had worked so hard to establish. The micro-cliffhanger tightened the air around me, a reminder that independence didn't mean isolation, and control could always be challenged. I took a slow, deliberate breath and considered my options. Madison needed guidance, yes, but my space was my priority. I reminded myself silently, reader, that saying yes didn't mean surrendering. It meant navigating carefully. With deliberate calm, I replied, setting a time while ensuring the conversation wouldn't overrun the boundaries I was trying to maintain. The delicate tension was immediate and palpable. I could feel the pull between compassion and self-preservation, a psychological trigger I had learned to recognize in the recent days of family navigation. Later, when Madison arrived, the small studio seemed even tinier, her presence filling it with the same energy of expectation that had followed me from my parents' apartment. I led her to the tiny living area, gesturing for her to sit as I moved to brew coffee. The aroma of the rich, dark liquid mingled with the faint scent of paper and furniture polish, a grounding sensory detail that allowed me to focus. Madison launched into questions about her project, and I listened, carefully responding with insight and suggestions, all the while monitoring my own energy, ensuring I did not overextend. The conversation was a tightrope walk. Every answer I gave, every piece of advice was measured against my need for boundaries. I could feel the micro-tension between us, a subtle push and pull that tested my patience and resolve. And yet, there was satisfaction in guiding her without being consumed by her demands. I realized that independence didn't mean refusing help. It meant choosing the terms on which I offered it. My psychology triggered by past pressures, knowing when to engage, when to pause, when to assert limits, was in full operation. After Madison left, I sank into the small corner chair with my cup of coffee, watching the city spread out before me through the wide window. The buildings reflected the morning sun, and a gentle breeze fluttered the curtain, bringing with it the faint hum of life outside. I sipped slowly, letting the warmth fill me, and allowed a small private laugh at the absurdity of it all. I was alone, free, and in control, but not without responsibility, not without the lingering thread of tension from family obligations. I let my gaze drift over the rooftops, taking in the blend of chaos and calm, the juxtaposition of city noise with the quiet of my studio. This moment, fleeting yet profound, became a pause in the emotional roller coaster, a necessary rest in the wave of pressures and expectations. I allowed myself to feel both the relief of accomplishment and the subtle anxiety of anticipation. Independence was sweet, but vigilance was necessary. Every decision, every pause, every breath was a conscious act of self-preservation. Packing, guiding, sipping coffee, observing. My day became a rhythm, a sequence that balanced control with awareness. I felt the small victories accumulate. I had defended my space, maintained composure under pressure, and helped without losing myself. The tension of micro-cliffhangers, Madison's unexpected visit, the subtle tests of my boundaries, kept me alert, sharpening my awareness, yet the pauses of solitude provided grounding and reflection. I realized that freedom, even in a small studio, was layered with choice, responsibility, and the intricate navigation of human relationships. By the time the sun began to dip lower in the sky, painting the room with a golden hue, I felt a fragile equilibrium settle over me. The boxes were neatly stacked, the studio organized, and my mental state cautiously balanced. I had claimed my autonomy, exercised empathy, and preserved my energy. The tension of family expectation was present but manageable, a challenge I could now face on my own terms. I took a deep breath, savoring the moment, letting the quiet of my studio and the distant hum of the city remind me that I was no longer at the mercy of other people's schedules, fears, or demands. I was here, I was ready, and I had chosen my terms. The morning started quietly, the studio bathed in a soft, pale light that seemed to promise peace. I thought I had left all the chaos behind in my old apartment, tucked away with the boxes I had carried here. But as I sipped my coffee, the subtle vibration of my phone shattered the calm. A text from Mrs. Lang, a neighbor of my parents, blinked insistently on the screen. "Elena, I hate to bother you, but your parents are in a bit of trouble since selling the house. Thought you should know." My heart clenched. Trouble? What kind of trouble? I stared at the message, the words repeating in my mind. The questions multiplied instantly. Should I intervene even from a distance? Could I maintain my boundaries while still offering help? The internal debate tugged at me, a familiar push and pull between empathy and self-preservation. I felt the familiar tension coil in my chest, tight and insistent, and I knew that my next move would define more than just this morning. It could set the tone for the coming week. I typed a quick reply, careful to keep it measured, and hit send. Then I waited, my eyes flicking constantly between the screen and the window, where the city stretched out in serene indifference. The pause was torturous, every second stretching long as I imagined my parents' reaction. Would they be panicked? Would they see this as another opportunity to lean on me, to test my boundaries yet again? The micro-cliffhanger tightened its grip, holding me and, by extension, the reader, in suspended tension. As the minutes ticked by, I thought of the letters I had found years ago, the subtle favoritism, the unspoken expectations, and the weight of Madison's text from days past. Each memory layered over the present, reminding me of the delicate balance I needed to maintain. I closed my eyes briefly, drawing in a deep breath, centering myself. Yes, there was empathy here, but there was also strategy. Helping didn't mean losing myself. It meant navigating carefully, weighing each action against both consequence and personal limits. Finally, the reply arrived. My parents' words were unexpectedly humble. Elena, thank you for caring even from afar. We realize now that we've relied on you too much. We are learning to manage on our own. Relief rippled through me, but it was tempered by the awareness that this was only part of the story. They were attempting independence, yet I still had to remain vigilant, ensuring that my autonomy was respected even as they adjusted to a reality I had long predicted. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of the situation settle. The micro-tension was replaced by a quiet, reflective space. I could feel the emotional roller coaster easing for the moment, a gentle trough in the otherwise jagged sine curve of my experiences with them. I allowed a soft, private smile, a recognition of the progress that had begun, however small or tentative. Then, unexpectedly, Madison's voice chimed in over a call. Elena, I've never really appreciated you properly before, but now I see things differently, she said, her tone almost shy, but unmistakably sincere. I paused, stunned. The twist was sudden and disarming, a bolder layer to the narrative I had been navigating. Madison, who had been a source of tension, misunderstanding, and pressure, was now acknowledging something I hadn't expected: my role, my wisdom, my calm under pressure. The twist bared a raw human dimension to the dynamics I had been carefully untangling. I let the words sink in, feeling a complex mixture of pride, relief, and cautious optimism. I took a long sip of my coffee, letting the warmth flow through me, and exhaled deeply. This was my pause, my chance to process without reacting. The emotional tide had surged and ebbed, and now there was room for clarity. I allowed myself to feel empathy not just for Madison, but for my parents as well, recognizing the human vulnerabilities that had driven their actions. Yet, I kept my boundaries firmly in place, aware that care and self-preservation were not mutually exclusive. Sitting by the window, I watched the city move below, the cars and pedestrians oblivious to the subtle dramas unfolding in apartments above. The micro-cliffhanger of earlier tension had resolved into a soft, reflective space, the psychology triggers at work highlighting the empathy I felt and the careful assertion of independence I had cultivated. I thought about how learning to balance love, duty, and personal space was a skill I had honed under the most exacting conditions, and how that skill now allowed me to navigate these unexpected conflicts with grace. The day continued in a quiet rhythm, punctuated by small interactions, phone messages, and brief moments of contemplation. I reminded myself silently, it was okay to feel relief and still hold vigilance, to recognize progress without letting my guard down completely. Each sip of coffee, each glance at the city skyline, each exhale of tension became a reinforcement of the boundaries I had worked to establish. Independence was not merely physical, it was emotional, strategic, and enduring. By the evening, a calm settled over the studio, a fragile yet tangible reassurance that I had navigated the challenges effectively. My parents were learning their lessons, Madison was seeing me in a new light, and I, for the first time in weeks, felt that sense of equilibrium that had seemed impossible just days before. I leaned back, letting the moment linger, aware that the coming days would bring new tensions, but comforted in the knowledge that I had the tools, and the resolve, to meet them. The unexpected conflicts had arrived, but I had emerged not just intact, but strengthened. The morning sun poured through the large studio window, painting the room in warm, golden hues. For the first time since the upheaval, I felt a sense of balance settling over me, a quiet realization that the storms of the past weeks were easing. I sat at the small table sipping my coffee and thought about the delicate dance I had navigated with my parents. Boundaries had been drawn, expectations clarified, and for the first time there was mutual respect, an understanding that I could care for them without losing myself. The emotional weight that had pressed down on me like an unyielding tide had softened, replaced by cautious optimism. I remembered our first tentative conversations since moving into the studio. At first, they had been hesitant, awkward, their voices tinged with guilt. I had approached each dialogue carefully, balancing honesty with empathy, asserting my limits without sounding accusatory or harsh. "I need space to manage my own life," I would say gently, "but I want to support you in ways that are healthy for both of us." It was not an easy formula, and the room often filled with pauses, tension hanging in the air like a cloud. Yet slowly they began to respond, matching my tone, listening instead of reacting. The progress was subtle but significant. My father had started to acknowledge his reliance on me in ways that were humbling, admitting that he had taken my patience for granted. My mother had expressed gratitude for the small ways I maintained contact, even from a distance, respecting my boundaries. Madison, too, had softened, showing glimpses of understanding that I had previously thought impossible. These moments of recognition were like tiny sparks lighting a path toward reconciliation. As I folded a fresh stack of laundry, I allowed myself a small private smile. The psychological triggers of stress and empathy had been put into motion throughout this journey, but now the balance had shifted. I felt relief without guilt, care without overextension. The micro-cliffhangers of past days, the uncertain texts, the unexpected visits, the pressure-filled confrontations, had given way to a rhythm I could manage. My pulse had steadied, the sine wave of tension smoothing into something sustainable. Just as I was about to take a sip of coffee, my phone pinged with a new email notification. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened it, recognizing Madison's name in the sender line. The message was brief, but enough to spark immediate curiosity. "Hey, Elena, I've been working on a new project and would love your insight if you're free." My heart skipped a beat, a mix of anticipation and apprehension coursing through me. Even now, after weeks of navigating tension, there was the thrill of uncertainty, a micro-cliffhanger embedded in the ordinary moment. What was this project? Would it demand more of me, or was it an opportunity to redefine our relationship in a healthier way? I set the email aside for a moment, letting the suspense linger. I leaned back, letting the chair support my weight, and allowed my gaze to wander across the cityscape outside. The buildings shimmered in the morning light, reflecting the quiet resilience I felt within. There was a moment of clarity. I had learned not just to assert boundaries, but to balance empathy with self-preservation, to care without surrendering. The lessons were subtle, cumulative, and they had reshaped how I approached not just my family, but the world around me. Later, I received a call from my parents. Their voices were lighter than I had heard in months, tinged with humor and warmth. We laughed over a small mishap. Mom had spilled juice on a corner of the rug, and for the first time, the sound of shared amusement replaced tension. The room felt lighter, the weight of expectation dissipated. Madison even chimed in over speaker, teasing gently about my meticulous organization. The small moment of familial humor was almost sacred, a twist of emotion that softened the edges of everything that had come before. I allowed myself to reflect on how far we had come. From the initial shock and anger, through the tense confrontations and ethical dilemmas, to the delicate reconstructions of trust and understanding, the journey had been complex, layered, and deeply human. I realized that freedom wasn't just about physical distance. It was about emotional sovereignty, about maintaining clarity while remaining connected. Independence and love were not opposites. They were complementary forces, each reinforcing the other when balanced carefully. Sitting with my coffee, watching the city stretch beneath me, I felt gratitude for the growth, both my own and theirs. The previous week's conflicts, micro-cliffhangers, and surprises had not only tested my resilience, but had also revealed the underlying humanity in my parents and sister. Their vulnerabilities were no longer obstacles. They were reminders of shared humanity, of the work required to nurture relationships without losing oneself. The sunlight shifted as the morning progressed, and I allowed a soft laugh to escape me at a shared joke from a text Madison had sent. The tension of previous weeks had ebbed into a gentle rhythm. I knew that challenges would continue to appear. Family dynamics were rarely linear, but for the first time, I felt equipped to navigate them. I could honor my independence, preserve my boundaries, and still engage with love and empathy. The email from Madison remained unread, a small spark of suspense dangling at the edge of my thoughts. I couldn't ignore it, yet I could wait, choosing the timing that suited me, reminding myself that control over my life was finally mine. The delicate blend of freedom, responsibility, and connection created a complex but satisfying resolution, the final wave in a journey that had been tumultuous, reflective, and ultimately rewarding. As I set the cup down and gazed once more at the skyline, I felt the culmination of the sine wave of emotion: pressure, tension, empathy, relief, and finally, hope. I had reclaimed my life without sacrificing care for my family. Laughter, shared understanding, and new boundaries formed a mosaic of growth, proof that reconciliation was possible and that autonomy and love could coexist. And just as the sun reached its zenith, the anticipation of Madison's new project lingered, a final nudge of curiosity and promise for the days ahead.